All fungi are absorptive heterotrophs. They're other feeders that absorb their nutrients from their environment. There are two types. There's saprotrophs and parasites. Saprotrophs feed on dead and decaying material, organic material, and this is very important to the decomposition on Earth. And then we also have parasitic fungi that live on or in another organism to the detriment of the host species. Fungi can live in diverse habitats. Most are multicellular, although some are unicellular, most notably yeasts. And fungi cannot move. In the broader schema of classification of life on Earth, fungi are eukaryotes. Remember that eukaryotes are multicellular organisms with membrane-bound organelles. Fungi are closely related to animals. We're both heterotrophs. And although for a long time fungi and plants were often classified together, they are different kingdoms. Within the kingdom fungi, there are several phyla. So remember our classification scheme. Dumb King Philip came over for great spaghetti. Domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, genus, species. So phylum is an intermediate classification. The zygomycetes are common molds, most notably bread molds. They have roots, rhizoids, and stolon, root-like and stem-like hyphae. In the Ascomycota, which are the sac fungi, we have our baking yeasts and our fermentation yeasts for making bread and wine. The yeast is the only unicellular fungi to note. We have the Basidiomycota. These are the club fungi, which are the mushrooms that we're used to associating fungi with in our mind. Some mushrooms are edible, some are poisonous. And then we have the Deuteromycota, and these are the imperfect fungi, which have only been observed to engage in asexual reproduction. And it's a very diverse group, but most notably penicillin comes from Penicillium fungi. The fungi are entirely composed of hyphae. The anchoring components are mycelia, and the spore-releasing components are generally considered the fruiting bodies. There are two different kinds of hyphae. Septate hyphae have cell walls between the cells, and non-septate hyphae have no cell walls, so it's kind of a continuous structure with floating nuclei. Both are composed of chitin. This is a kind of carbohydrate, so remember that carbohydrates are complex sugars, and they are found in the exoskeletons of arthropods, and we looked at arthropods in a recent lab, so that should jog your memory. The hyphae, so remember that fungi are absorptive heterotrophs, and how do they do this? Well, they secrete digestive enzymes into the environment, and these enzymes break down nutrients into absorbable forms. And this all happens outside of the fungus body. Fungi, continuing our talk about anatomy, have sporangia. So fungi spores can be formed in three ways. They can be formed in the terminal cells of reproductive hyphae. They can be formed in sporangia, these enlarged structures at the end of the specialized hyphae, or in fruiting bodies that contain the spores. Remember that a spore is a unit of reproduction, and we've discussed these before when we discussed non-flowering plants, bacteria, and algae. Fungi undergo asexual and sexual reproduction. So looking first at asexual sporulative reproduction, hyphae produce mitospores by mitosis. Okay, so notice that we're talking about haploid cells that are just reproducing clonally by mitosis. The evolutionary significance here is that asexual reproduction results in no genetic mixing of information. So the offspring are identical to the mother cell unless some kind of mutation occurs, and most notably bread molds are an example of a fungi that undergoes asexual reproduction. Fungi also undergo sexual reproduction. In zygotic sporulative reproduction, two haploid mating types called gametes exchange genetic information in conjugation. So when we say two haploid mating types, this is often denoted by a plus and a minus, which you can sort of think of in your mind as male and female, but they're not different in terms of their reproductive structures in any way. They're just two different mating types. They can fuse together, but as soon as this diploid zygote occurs, meiosis ensues to go back to a haploid stage. So the majority of the fungi life cycle is composed of haploid existence and a very brief diploid existence. So let's look at a bunch of different kinds of fungi. So in the zygomycota, most notably the bread mold, there are three kinds of hyphy. Hyphy, remember, just really fine filaments of cells. So we have stolons, which are over the organism components that connect organisms. So in plants, strawberries and spider plants have stolons. You know, they can send off a little baby, and then when that baby sits on the soil, it roots and creates another organism. Then we also already talked about rhizoids. Rhizoids are like fake roots, and they primarily perform the function of anchoring. They don't normally do all the jobs that roots would do. And in fact, fungi don't have any true roots. Finally, we have the Sporangiophore, and this is the specialized fruiting body. So, zygote fungi exhibit both asexual and sexual reproduction. Zygotes form from conjugation when there's a physical connection between the hyphae of the two mating types. And we'll go through this process in more detail in the next couple of slides. But essentially, the zygote, the diploid, can go on to produce the whole organism, but not before meiosis occurs to reinstate a haploid condition. Now let's look at the Ascomycota. These are the sac fungi, and they exhibit sexual reproduction. And we're going to talk about two processes here repetitively, so hopefully it will become more clear what we're talking about. So in plasmogamy, we have the fusion of haploid gametes to make dikaryotic hyphae. All right, so here are the two mating types that we talked about. And in plasmogamy, we have the cells becoming one, but the nuclei are still independent, and that's why we still consider this haploid. It's dikaryo, karyo being nuclei, two nuclei hyphae. All right, and in the fruiting body, the ascocarp, the ascus develops, and then we see the process of karyogamy, where the two nuclei actually fuse together to make a zygote, a diploid zygote, so a nucleus with two copies of chromosomal information. But then immediately following that, meiosis ensues to reinstate the haploid condition, and then the haploid nuclei are replicated through mitosis to produce ascospores. All right, and then we have dispersal, and the whole process starts again. Some common sac fungi, we have Dutch elm disease, in which beetle actually attack the trees and they carry a fungus, which results in a secondary attack on the tree. Here we have the delicacy truffles and yeasts. The club fungi are the Basidiomycota. These exhibit sexual reproduction, which produces basidiospores. And notice we see this word carp again. We had the ascocarp before. Here we have the basidiocarp. So carp should tell you fruiting body. Again, we have plasmogamy occurring where we have a fusion of haploid gametes to make a dikaryotic hyphae by mitosis. And then karyogamy occurs where the nuclei fuse. So now there's two sets of genetic information. This is a diploid, which then undergoes meiosis to produce haploid cells again, the haploid basidiospores. And notice the major difference here between the basidiomycetes and the ascomycetes is that meiosis is not immediately followed by mitosis. So the haploid basidiospores that result, the number of them is number 4. But in the ascomycetes, because mitosis follows immediately, the resulting ascospores number is 8. Some common club fungi, we have rusts, which infect plants and can cause a lot of loss in the agricultural community. We also have shelf fungi and then culinary mushrooms. Now let's talk about imperfect fungi. This is the phylum Deuteromycota. This is a highly diverse group, and only asexual reproduction has been observed by scientists. The hyphae produce, this is a simplified process in which hyphae produce haploid mitospores called kinidiospores, which germinate to produce new mycelia. So it's not really a two-step process, just one step. Most notably, athlete's foot is an imperfect fungi, as is penicillin. Finally, here we have lichens. Lichens are an interesting symbiosis, a mutualism between fungus and alga. Usually, a sac fungus is the fungal partner. The fungus absorbs water and nutrients and anchors the organism, while the alga conducts photosynthesis, so bringing important carbon-based compounds into the organism. There are 3 types of lichens: crustose lichens, these are really common in Colorado, foliose lichens, and fruticose lichens. I think I've seen all 3 in the forest. And typically you see these like in the subalpine where it's pretty moist, because remember, fungi are not vascular, they cannot transport water, they just have to absorb moisture from the nearby environment.